Today, we're diving into a topic that's more relevant than ever: setting boundaries in the workplace. Let's face it, the corporate world is crushing people right now. Leaders aren't trained to deal with the human side of their teams. Employees are being asked to do more with fewer resources, and the lack of clear boundaries is creating an epidemic burnout with disengagement and stress. My guest today is Amy Armstrong, a conflict resolution specialist, educator, and coach who has spent decades helping leaders, families, and individuals create healthy boundaries with dignity and respect. She's an internationally recognized expert on trauma-informed conflict resolution, and her upcoming book, Mastering Boundaries, will be a must-read for anyone who wants to reclaim their power without becoming a bully or a doormat. Today, we'll explore how setting boundaries isn't about shutting others out, but about stepping into our own power with clarity and confidence. Amy, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. What a kind introduction. I'm so pleased to be here.
Well, I know we met a couple of weeks ago and immediately found some connection there. So this is going to be a great conversation today. And now more than ever, we're feeling this pressure from all sides. Things are shifting and we need an anchor to cling to. And so my curiosity when people come on the show, or whether I meet them in person, is I want to know, what's the passion behind doing the work that you do? Do you have an origin story to share with us?
Oh, I do. I can put it simply by saying I did it all wrong myself for so many years. The pain was almost unbearable, and I felt like a failure, even though I knew I had good skills. I knew I was a competent professional, yet I always went to bed really sad. And there was this grief involved with so many of my relationships where I felt like I had let other people down, or I had let myself down. Oh, the heaviness was almost unbearable.
All right. So as we look at corporate, you've worked with leaders, businesses, and families. Mm-hmm. What are you seeing in today's workplace culture that makes boundaries, setting boundaries, such a critical issue? What's going on?
Mm-hmm. So when people don't live within their value system, they're never going to feel satisfied. And what I have seen in my experience has, especially women, and I will say I can picture a lot of men as well, when we try to set boundaries, we often end up with a prickly edge. And we feel like we're being bold and making this no known, and standing up for ourselves, which we've been told on so many levels we need to do, but it still doesn't feel right because it's not in keeping with our values. Mm-hmm. And Lisa, I see people either you're in keeping with your values and you're kind and you're generous and supportive of others, or you're trying to taking a stand and saying no and ending up really feeling like someone you're not. Mm-hmm. So when I was first realizing that I needed boundaries, it became very obvious to me that I had no role models for women who set boundaries that weren't bitches, that weren't, didn't have a, and I knew I did not have a mean streak. And so I felt like, oh, I guess I can't set boundaries because I don't know how to have that, sort of harsh exterior that it takes to set boundaries. Once I developed boundaries with what was in my control, I found that I could still be a very kind, generous person and be very clear what I was willing and able to do without losing that amazing feeling when you're being yourself. You got to feel like yourself.
Yeah, you really do. And I think we do women a disservice when we teach them that they have to be aggressive to set boundaries. So how can they set strong boundaries without feeling they have to be someone they're not?
It takes a little bit of practice. The first step is to get clear, and I'm going to use first person. What am I able here? So look, someone asks you to do something, you're getting that cringy feeling like, oh, I want to say no. But instead of saying no, which you don't have to say no, you just have to say what you are willing and able to do.
Mm.
So if someone asks me to help with a project and I already have 3 projects going that have deadlines, I can say, oh my gosh, I'd be happy to help with that project. I can handle 3 at a time. Which ones should I prioritize?
Mm.
Is very different than saying, no, you can't ask me to do anything else. I'm already doing 3 projects right now. And so when we think about what we can do, the energy is amazing. It's so much more refreshing and exciting than that heavy feeling that comes by trying to resist. We
Hmm.
know that resistance is a constriction in the body that does not feel good. It literally causes a neck ache, a backache, shoulder pain. And we want to look at where we can relax in, where can we lean in? And saying yes to what we will do lets us look good, feel good, and still be very positive and productive without putting too much on our plate.
Yeah, so this leads me into something that really caught my attention with you, Amy. You've coined this phrase, pro me, not anti you. Can you explain what that means and how that would apply to a corporate setting?
Absolutely. Our brain likes shortcuts, and blame is one of the primary shortcuts. I promise we all do it. When something doesn't feel good or when we're worried about something, we go right to blame. Whose fault is it? Or, we judge. If only this person or that person didn't do this or that, we'd be fine. And so we naturally have this defense mechanism that pushes other people away or makes someone else responsible for how we feel. That's anti you, that's anti the other person, where we're making them the enemy or the devil rather than taking responsibility for ourselves. So, pro me means I'm willing to do the work to know who I am and what I'm willing and able to do in any given moment so that I'm going to stand up for who I am authentically rather than putting you down.
Mhm.
And the energy that comes from that is amazing. It takes a little bit of work and it does take practice. It gets very much easier over time. But now, when someone is coming at me with something negative, I mean, I work in the field where I have plenty of people that come, that want to resist what I'm doing. And I can notice it for what it is and make choices in the heat of the moment about how and when and in what manner I'm willing to engage. So it never has to be anti anybody else. It can just be, hey, I'm pro me. I'm going to take really good care of myself right now and do as much as I can do well and do as much as I can do keeping my energy and well being intact.
So you referenced sometimes you get pushback on
Oh,
doing
yeah.
what you're doing, like you come into a place and you're getting
Yeah.
pushback. Could you maybe give us a little idea of what is it?
Sure.
What are the services you offer and what you're doing that
Sure.
people are a bit reticent to participate in, maybe?
So, one of the areas where I work is in family businesses, and I help families create the communication and the dialogue they need to have around their succession planning. And those are hard conversations. And I never stay away from challenging people. I'm a coach, so I know how to ask hard questions in a very open, non judgmental way. A lot of what and how questions that are steeped in curiosity.
Mm.
And when people are having hard conversations where they're starting to see that it's on them to make some changes, they can get defensive and come at me as if I just don't get it. And thankfully, most of my engagements are long term, and I can really develop a relationship with the person where they see that I'm very caring and very attentive. And I'm not going to let them stay stuck in the status quo when I know there's changes they can make, taking responsibility for their outcomes that truly are in their control. I also get a lot of pushback working with court ordered families. So
Mm-hmm.
I have folks that have judges order them to work with me and pay me, and they're working through big disagreements in their
Mm-hmm.
parenting plans, in their custody arrangements, in their finances, and that court is expecting them to get them resolved. And so I have to meet people in a lot of heat, when
Mm-hmm.
things are really difficult for them. And there's always tension in the room. And I'm so comfortable with that because I get to look for the gems. I'm always looking for the movable parts. And it doesn't take long for people to see that empowerment is really theirs
Mm-hmm.
as soon as they start to make some new choices. But
Yes,
they're hard conversations.
yeah, those would be. And I could see, like, you're going to make me shift my current position, is what they're thinking as they walk into it, not knowing that you
Right.
may be giving them the freedom that they can't find on their own.
That's a sweet word. I really like that word. It is freedom. As soon as people recognize that their life can change in a moment with a new choice, they start to get the magic of shifting out of that victim mindset and into a choice mindset.
And Amy, I could see, as we're looking today at businesses, whether it's family run businesses, family founded businesses, or major corporations, that there is this self that we bring to the conversation. There's this sense of survival of I'm going to win no matter what, whether I'm right or whether I'm wrong. So, would it be accurate to say that we're trying to take the personality out and maybe make the focus on the situation instead of the person? Is that some of the work you're trying to do?
I love where you're going with this. I like using the word person. You've used
Yes.
personality.
Yes.
I like focusing on the person, not that their personality needs to go away, but that we don't let it get in the way.
Okay.
To me, I define a win anytime we're able to preserve dignity.
Mm,
Anytime someone feels acknowledged, accepted, validated for their subjective experience and for what they bring to the table. And I believe very strongly, my commitment is to always focus on the person's dignity.
mhm,
So we never want to challenge beyond someone's capacity to feel a sense that there's some trust in the room and they can trust me never to ask anything of them that would undermine their dignity.
mhm,
So I ask big things of people, but I do it in a way that always allows people to preserve their sense of dignity as opposed to putting them in some kind of a shame
mhm.
state. Yeah.
And I could see how that could make me feel safe,
Mhm.
uh, and
Well,
not
I've
have to
got your
fight you.
back.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I've got your back. However, this is big here, but a lot of people, what they'll call their personality is actually a defense.
Hmm.
And we don't need to do that. You don't need to prove to me or justify to me that you are who you say you are. I'm going to believe you. And as the conversations evolve, people learn new ways of describing what they want and need and what their values and beliefs are so that we can make sure that we're finding solutions in keeping with what is absolutely true for each person.
Yes. I think that's
Mhm.
so good. So good.
Mhm. Yeah. So we just don't let personalities get in the way, and we learn not to take things personally, which is one of the
Mhm.
biggest lessons. I feel
Mhm.
like as I age, I get better and better at not taking things personally. We all have our own subjective experience, and what we see in another person is a display of what is real for them.
Mhm.
It isn't about us, even though our interaction may trigger or, maybe bubble up some things about them. But it's just never helpful to take things personally and blame ourselves or feel responsible for how anyone else thinks or feels.
Yeah. I think as we evolve, as we mature, we see we've been down that road. Like we've tried it. It didn't work.
It doesn't work.
It didn't work. It puts us in a bad place. So,
Oh,
lesson learned. We've got the stars
exactly.
to prove that. We've got the stars to prove that.
Exactly.
So,
Mhm.
as you work with companies, Amy, what are some signs that an employee or leader is suffering from lack of boundaries? And how would
Mhm.
this impact their mental health and their business outcomes?
Yeah. I can include burnout in that as well.
Okay.
So, lack of boundaries is so frustrating. So,
Mhm.
when I see a lot of frustration, that means that someone is trying to get someone else to change without having any leverage or consequences in place. We're just trying and hoping to make a positive difference. What I like to do instead is get curious and certainly state our wants and needs, but then really talk about what is my responsibility, right? Which broken down means response able, right? How am I
Mhm.
able to respond so that it shows that I mean what I say?
Mhm.
And this can be an employee to an employee, it can be a boss to an employee, or it can be the other way. It can be from the employee to the boss. And instead of just trying to get a different result, setting a boundary is going to lower the frustration. And when we get even a little bit good at boundaries, we start to trust ourselves enough that we're not so attached to outcomes because we know that we can pivot what we're willing and able to do based on the circumstances or whatever the outcomes are. And so we're taking control of what we can control, what is in our
Mhm.
power.
Yeah.
We're stating in a positive way what we're willing and able to do. And we don't have so much of that resistance, that constriction that comes from trying to get a different result just by hoping and wishing that that other person or that other situation would change.
Yes. And, I can't tell you how many times through the years I see people just take themselves over the edge because they're trying to control what other people are doing. And, you can't do that. It just doesn't work.
No one changes because someone tells them to. That is that the least effective way to get people to change is to tell them to change. So I really like to teach folks how to look for cues that someone else is even interested in your
Mhm.
influence.
Mhm.
And don't just talk and talk and talk, thinking that the more boldly and the more loudly you say what you have to say, that it's going to increase your influence. Quite the opposite is true. Looking for the cues first, maybe even asking, hey, is this a good time for some feedback? Or
Mhm.
can I share something that's been on my mind? Get an opening first,
Mhm.
then your influence can go up and you can demonstrate that you're interested in the other person's perspective as well. But just a one-sided telling someone what they should do, that's a never going to happen.
No, and I really like the part of asking permission, like
Oh
waiting
yeah.
for that invitation to come. If
Mhm.
it doesn't, is it okay if I share some feedback with you? Is
Mhm.
now a good time? Because what you're doing is then involving them in part of that. It's not one-sided, right? It's both of you together stepping together to have that conversation, which maybe makes it feel less, puts them less on the defensive.
It goes back to dignity. Who
Hmm.
doesn't want to be asked
Right.
to give a little input? Hey, sometime today, I'd like to share 10 or 15 minutes with you about how this project is going or how that conversation went. Let me know a good time.
Hmm.
And then if that person never comes up with a time, you get to choose. Are you willing or able to put a few ideas in writing? Are you willing to let it go? Or, what are you willing and able to do with that?
Right. Right. You
Yeah.
know, and I think too, when we're looking at the idea of doing this, Amy, there are
Mhm.
a whole lot of people out there that are people pleasers, that avoid conflict, that don't want to get comfortable. They don't want to get in an awkward
Right.
situation. So they feel like setting boundaries might make them difficult or I won't be liked anymore. How can we differentiate healthy boundaries from creating these walls that shut people out?
Yeah. That is such a good question because I see even well meaning people pleasers trying to set boundaries and they really degrade the relationship.
Hmm.
And no one wants that. No one wants the relationship to go downhill. And the answer to your question is really the work is on us first to get that clarity. We can't just say to someone, I don't like what you're doing. We need to look at ourselves and say, what's happening for me when this is going on? What would I like to see happen instead? Maybe make a proposal of an alternative rather than just saying what we don't like. Hey, would you be willing to knock before you come in my office? Or, hey, sometimes I'm in the middle of something. Um, would you mind scheduling a time so I can be sure and have some space for you?
Yeah.
It's going to sound a lot better than, hey, I'm working here.
Can't you see I'm working?
Yeah, get out of here. Yeah. And so if it does take time for us
Mhm.
to build that muscle of awareness, of mindfulness, to even be able to quickly assess what's going on with me, what's my true goal with this relationship, and then how can I express myself in a way that's in keeping with what's important to me about the relationship.
Mhm.
And Lisa, when we do that, we often find that we actually don't need the boundary as much as we thought we did. And we can often make changes ourselves that gets our needs met. So
Mm.
let's say you have someone that regularly barges in your office when you're working. Maybe you can structure your day and check in with them and say, hey,
Mhm.
I know we usually need to touch base a couple times a day. How's now? I've got 10 minutes right now. We might be able to take charge of when those interactions happen rather than trying to hide from that other person and hope they don't come barging in. So there's often, if we do the work, there's often a way for us to create a different environment to make sure we're getting our needs met in a way that doesn't make us feel cold and prickly,
Mhm.
especially as people pleasers that genuinely care about other people. So that's
Yeah.
healthy. It's healthy for us to do our own work first. And there's a philosophy that I subscribe to that came from a gentleman in the 70s. His last name was Cartman. The Cartman Triangle talks about conflict and how we often end up either feeling like a victim,
Mhm.
rescuing as some kind of hero, or else being the persecutor that judges other people and tries to hold other people to the standards. And when we're healthy, we can notice where we tend to lean in. Do I feel like a victim? Am I trying to take charge here and declare the rules for everyone? Or am I being too much of a rescuer and trying to make life nice for everyone else? And when we're willing to do that work, to take a look at our own vibe, our own approach, and instead maybe work with a coach or a friend or a journal to help us figure out what we really want and need, it is amazing how much smaller our problems become. They're manageable, much more manageable than we realize a lot of times.
Yes, and Amy, as you're talking about all of this, I'm thinking about how much our emotions are involved in this. All of these
1000%.
interactions. So, you've talked about how our nervous system can respond positively when we do have strong and clear boundaries. Is there some science behind that, or why does that matter if we're looking at creating places where people love to work?
Right. It's all science. I am so drawn to the field of neuroscience and how we can regulate our nervous system. And one of the quickest shortcuts for people is to learn not to believe everything you think and learn to have that mindfulness muscle that lets you notice your reactions and notice your emotions and even the level of intensity of the emotion, and ask yourself what you want or need to do with it rather than believe it means what we think it means, because it never does. And so, matter of fact, I was just coaching a gentleman before this call, and he has some really big emotions. He actually runs his company with his life partner and has some really big emotions about what's going on right now with them. And when I suggested that we ask for feedback rather than make assumptions about what's happening, he just stopped in his tracks, like, oh, I never thought about checking out these conclusions I was reaching. It's like, yeah, we could do that. We actually have a joint session tomorrow. How about we just check them out and see what you learn? So I happen to love emotions, and I love it when we can experience. I mean, I love emotions, and I love it when we can experience the full range of emotions. We just have to enjoy and experience those emotions from a little bit of a distance.
Mm-hmm.
So when we identify with that emotion, I am angry, I am frustrated, I am sad, I am worried, I am confused. When we identify that that is me, we're going to get stuck. If
Mm-hmm.
we can remember to look at it as like, oh wow, there's some confusion here. That's very different than I am confused. And so we notice what's happening in our headspace, and we breathe and we make choices about what we want to do with it, so that we're not letting those emotions be our decision maker. We're still in charge.
And I think what we have done as we have raised our children, because we may be uncomfortable with emotions, we teach people to stuff them away, to hide them, to not express them because we're uncomfortable. But, emotions, energy in motion is a signal to us. It's like it's saying something, isn't it, Amy?
It is really good information. Yes. And it's funny, as in not haha, but in like, oh gosh. When we think we're not letting emotions drive us, we have to realize that at the end of the day, we all vote. We make all of our choices based on what feels right to us. And
Mm-hmm.
so we might think that it's purely logic that we're using. It never is. The emotions always play a part. So the more we can learn to name the emotion and let it be just another piece of information,
Mm-hmm.
then that emotion won't take over and sabotage our goals and our relationships.
Right. I believe it was Brene Brown did a study and asked, I can't remember, 7,000 people what emotions they could name. And there were three: happy, sad, and angry. And
Mm.
I don't know, she came up, she's got a book, I can't remember the name of it, but it's
Mm.
she came up with like maybe 70 or 80 different emotions that you
Emotions.
have. Do
Mhm.
you have a process that you work with people to help them define what they're even feeling, since we
Right.
have not taught people how to
Mhm.
use their emotions?
I have kind of a interesting approach because I am a therapist, but I work exclusively as a coach.
Hmm.
And I have heard over the years that a lot of people don't want to be asked, how do you feel?
Hmm.
And that's fine with me. And a lot of people don't have, like you're saying, don't have a good vocabulary for describing it anyway. So when I ask questions like, what's going on right now? Or
Mm.
what kind of experience are you having with what we're talking about right now? Or what's it like, to hear this person say that, you did something that caused harm? I'm really asking, how do you feel?
Hmm.
I'm just asking it in a way that feels a little less threatening for people. And then I use their language. So, however they describe it, I try to use their words
Hmm.
back to them. And I always ask them when they're experiencing something that they might term as negative. I might say, gosh, once we address that, we'll call it frustration, what will be in its place?
Hmm.
Or what would you like to experience instead? And what that does is help them see what they do want, not what
Hmm.
they don't want.
Right.
And once we start to get a more clear vision of what they are trying to create, the steps to create it become remarkably clear.
Mm. There's that movement towards positive again instead of that negative that kind of gets us in a bad place.
It
Um,
is positive.
yeah.
Something funny though, Lisa, I don't always use that word
Hmm.
because one of the ways people used to describe me is too positive. And
Mm.
you know what that meant? It meant kind of fake.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so, what I like to think of now is it's more about clarity and about commitment to what you desire
Yeah.
rather than just saying we're supposed to feel positive. Because
Right.
I don't know, maybe that's not how you want to see yourself.
Right.
I
And
like to
I
let people describe it for themselves.
right. Seen as having rose-colored glasses all the time, you may be seen as not in touch with reality.
Ugh.
Yeah.
I got that for a lot of years
Yeah.
because I was in a very painful space and I didn't want to show how much I was suffering.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
I learned how to just sort of have a
Yeah.
sort of a pasted on smile and keep going. And I think people could see right through it, but I just didn't
Hmm.
have the vocabulary
Hmm.
to set boundaries. And so I just lived with whatever came my way without being in charge of my own power at all for a
Right.
lot of years.
So, I'm looking at the mask that we are expected to bring in many situations when we're working for someone else, working in a company.
Right.
But there's a lot of talk right now about authenticity and authentic leadership, the power that comes with authentic leadership. What does authentic leadership look like in a professional setting? How do we navigate that?
I love that question. Matter of fact, I can quote Brene Brown too here in Dare to Lead. She talks about vulnerability
Mhm.
as leaders, and it doesn't mean being transparent and just dumping everything on the table. It really means truth telling in keeping with your values. So we
Mhm.
can still be private. It just means that we're able to describe what's true for us rather than feel like we just have to say what other people want to hear.
Mhm.
So let's go back to that employee that's given a project at the end of the day that feels like they're being completely dumped on. For that employee to be able to say, I would have a lot of energy for this tomorrow before noon. I could have it in by probably even 11:30. Would that work for you? is probably going to create a much more empowered relationship with that manager or boss than if you do it with resentment, do
Mhm.
it sort of a shabby job, and end up bringing a big black cloud of negativity in with you to the office. And being able to just get clear and say, gosh, I've got 45 minutes left today. Would it be okay if I did a good job finishing up this other task I've already gotten started? And then I could be really outstanding with that project in the morning. Would be a very clear boundary. I'm not saying that boss is 100% of the time going to agree, but it does start to teach the people around you
Mhm.
that you have self respect, that you're willing to give.
Mhm.
You're just not willing to be dumped on.
Yeah. I
It
think
is
that,
practice over
yeah,
time to be able to do that.
the willingness to give is really important. And I'm going to have a lot more respect because you brought me into your thought process
Yeah,
where it's not that what I'm doing to you, it's what we're doing together, right? That we're able to
right.
work together to come to an agreement on how this will be done while honoring and
So
respecting them.
it would not be authentic leadership to just say, no, I'm not doing that, or I can't do that. That
Mhm.
is not in keeping with your value
Mhm.
of, I don't know, how you want to be portrayed as a significant employee.
Yeah.
But we also don't have to pretend that we like it and pretend that something's fine when it's absolutely not.
Yeah.
I like this conversation when people are using terms of endearment that are
Mhm.
unwanted. I run
Okay.
into this a lot where people feel degraded, and it could be a racial issue, it could be a gender issue. Telling someone what you like to be called is a very empowered way of addressing
Mhm.
what you don't like to be called.
Mhm.
Maybe someone's being given a nickname that feels demeaning as a woman, or maybe it's a nickname that's not your name and you don't want to be
Mhm.
called that.
Mhm.
Just saying, I like to be called Amy makes a very clear message. And if you have to step it up from there, you can say, I'll be glad to respond to you when you call me Amy. That's a way of saying, you don't call me by the right name, I'm not answering you.
Right.
It's just you don't go there with the cold, prickly vibes. You take charge of yourself and say, I will be glad to engage in a conversation with you when you call me Amy.
Yes. And I see this more as putting people on equal footing rather than someone speaking down to you. Yeah,
Right.
of doing that.
And I feel for people that have been degraded and get demeaning language in their workplaces. I do. I feel for them. I just always like to ask the question, what can you control? Because you can't always control your destiny at work. You can't always control, for goodness sakes, you can't always control who you work for. People and jobs get shifted around. You may end up working for someone that you do not like the way they treat you. Our job is to, no matter what, think about what is in your control and make sure that you're representing yourself as an equal, even if you're not being treated as an equal,
Mhm. Mhm. Set that
even when that seems
expectation.
impossible.
Mhm.
Mhm,
Yes, I do that. Amy,
mhm,
you teach people to recognize the difference between their comfort zone, their stretch zone, and their
mhm,
panic zone. How
mhm.
can we, as leaders and
Yeah.
employees, use this model to set our boundaries effectively, knowing we have those three zones?
Thank you. I love that question. And it goes back to neuroscience. If we
Mhm.
push ourselves too hard, we're in fight or flight or freeze. In other words, we're either shut down or we're so stimulated by the situation that we're just in survival mode. We can't think very well in that state. So if we find ourselves having a hard time making decisions, or if we have ourselves find ourselves feeling disengaged, really not caring, those are signs that we've probably pushed ourselves too
Mhm.
far. And I say pushed ourselves because I always like to use language that shows that we are in charge of how hard we're pushing. So if someone is coming at us and they're engaging with us in a way that leaves our nervous system overactivated to the point that we might even shut down, our job is to be very clear in our own mind. Yeah, I'm not doing this.
Mhm.
Even if we have to stand there and look like we're doing it, we have to be able to dissociate from the conversation and not believe what's being said to us. It's hard work. But to go back to your question, we don't want to stay in our comfort zone either because we will get burnout and bored.
Mhm.
Our brains crave stimulation. We crave novelty. And so if we're not learning and growing, we're not going to feel good either.
Right.
So the answer to your question is we have to develop a mindful check-in. I call it just a little mini mindfulness break throughout the day. I like to use five a day times, whether you set your alarm or you link it to other things that you do, like going to the bathroom or, refilling your water bottle, and use that as a time to check in and really ask yourself, um, how am I? And just use that time to really ask yourself, how am I doing right now? How am I engaging? And am I learning and growing and really in my best headspace, or am I a little overwhelmed right now? And so when we do that check in, we can then link it to well being exercises if we need to come down a little bit into comfort or rise up a little bit into being more alert.
That is a great step that we can all use to reclaim kind of where we are during the day. I think that's a really valuable tip. So we'll make sure we call that one out as well. Amy, both you and
Awesome.
I believe that corporate cultures need to focus on people. Profits are
Mhm.
important, but we also need to focus on our people. What are some ways companies can start bringing this humanity back to business?
Mhm. People are our best human resource, always. So, one thing I caution leaders is not to become passive because they're trying to see their employees as more human. We don't have to be passive. We certainly do not want this generation or any future generation to think that we don't have really high standards. High standards in our companies is very, very important. People want to contribute to high standards and a high value operation. It's just that we can engage with choices, with check-ins, and with a little bit of a personal touch that doesn't take hardly any time at all, that will keep bringing out the best in that employee. So saying hi, how was your weekend is not an invitation for the 15 or 20-minute version of what you did all weekend. It's just a nice way of saying, I see you as a human and I hope you had a break over the weekend or had a little fun. And then giving choices. Hey, I've got this new project for you. Do you want to stop what you're doing and turn over? Choices are so important. Do we need to say, hey, I've got this project for you. Would you rather take it on now and I'll give your current project to someone else? Or would you rather finish up what you're doing and start this one on Friday? And just giving small choices works for parenting. It works in our intimate relationships, and it works really well in the workplace. So people are seen as having valid contribution.
I think that's very good. And it reminded me exactly of a conversation I had with a 3-year-old grandson about giving choices, right? So
Yes.
it starts very early and it's a great skill to have
Right.
as we move on, as
Yeah.
we move.
It's not, do you want to put your coat on? It's, do you want mommy to put your coat on or grandma to put your coat on?
Right. That's which of
Yeah.
these projects? Exactly. Exactly. Well, Amy, They've offered so much value here, and I know you've got a book coming up, which we'll probably invite you back on to just discuss a
Thank
little bit
you.
more. But if people would like to reach out to you or work with you, what's the best way for them to contact you?
Sure, they can find me on LinkedIn at Amy Armstrong Coach. I run a TikTok channel for high conflict co-parents called
Oh,
Amy Armstrong Conflict Free. And my company is the Center for Family Resolution. And you can find me there and book a consult right from that website.
well, that's amazing. A TikTok channel. I'm going to have to go check that out. I would imagine that would bring incredible value and a lot more peace in the world than what we may be
Yeah.
currently
It's
experiencing.
all about power and
Mhm.
stepping into authentic power without ever putting anyone else down.
Oh, I like the way that sounds. Well, Amy, thank you so much for being with us. I really have enjoyed this conversation.
Oh, Lisa, this is a dream. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate chatting with you.
All right. And been such an incredible, insightful conversation. The way you frame boundaries as a tool for empowerment rather than restriction is exactly the mindset shift that we need for corporate leaders and employees right now. So, for anyone who wants to learn more, be sure to check out Amy's upcoming book, Mastering Boundaries, and follow her on LinkedIn. We'll put all of those links in the show notes. If you found value in this conversation, please subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with a friend or two or three who needs to hear it. And until next time, remember boundaries aren't barriers. They're the foundation for thriving, sustainable, and a human-centered workplace. So take your passion, turn it into something that you can help people as Amy has done today. And we'll look forward to seeing you here next week.